let's get started. Can y'all hear me back there? My audio turned off in the middle of the last lecture, and luckily it was right before I started the part where I read everything on the slide. So, but if y'all notice something different back there, kind of raise your hand and let me know, because I don't want to shortchange the non-attenders who I'm standing here judging. No, I'm not. I promise. Okay, so some announcements. There will be a riddle today. And the riddle for next week is so hard that I'm giving it to you ahead of time. So that's also going out to you this afternoon. I haven't done the Google form yet, but you can look and see what the riddle is and see if you can find what's going on there. Okay, so today we're going to talk about some of the logical implications of what we're studying right now. I'm going to tell you about a teaching study that I'm engaged in. We're going to talk about the readings because we weren't able to get to the readings on Tuesday. And we're going to hopefully get to practicing categorizing more claims. But if we don't get there today, we will do it Tuesday. Okay? All right. So first of all, I want to do some fun things. True or false, y'all just call out. The reading claims there is no such thing as a scientific fact. True. I'm the one that said it. And fight me. All right. All right. Everybody will fight me on that one. The reading claims math is not a science. True. Woohoo. All right. The reading claims that science is not the collection of a list of subject matter facts like physics and chemistry. That's false. All right. Correlation is valid evidence for causation. It is. I know it doesn't prove it, but nothing does. Like that's what you got to kind of get. It's like you're kind of swimming in new water because everybody has heard the mantra correlation is not causation, and it's caused a logical fallacy that it's never causation, right? And it's pretty difficult to disentangle a correlation and figure out what's going on. That's what I do in my second data course that is required for political scientists. When I teach it, the entire semester is diagnosing a correlation to figure out what's going on there, basically. And then students have to contribute to human knowledge in order to get an A, and the majority of students get an A. It's kind of cool. All right, so that's an ad for that class. So just because it doesn't prove causation doesn't mean it's not valid as evidence, right? And so you just have to be an expert, like our genius TA graduate students who are kind of getting to be experts in understanding how that works. All right, so, but nothing does. Once it's proven, it's no longer science. It's in the body of facts and the subject matter, right? Gravity, stuff like that. Duverger's law, we'll get to that later. That's our only law in political science. Okay, the riddle for next week is find the causal argument in Griswold. It's a one-page reading, and you just have to find it, okay? And then you have to find the single word in the Bill of Rights that necessitates statistical inference. All right, that'll be fun. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about the teaching study I'm working on. So I am working with a computer science and biochemistry professor at UCLA because he's invented similar teaching techniques to what I have, and so we've been working together for a while. And my method turns out to be quite common in STEM education, but less common in social science education. And that's because I've been reading the STEM education literature for 10 years, and I'm kind of learning from them. And I kind of created a teaching technique that is my own. It's like I created it. And so Christopher Lee, he teaches a very difficult statistics course for seniors, and they go off to careers where they're analyzing statistical inference of genes, okay? And his course 75% of the students were failing. And he's like, what's going on? And then he started investigating and doing research that's common in STEM education research, called student conceptions research. And he wrote the software that you will be using in your practice exams to try to, that's the number one thing you should do. If you do nothing else in this course, do the practice exams, because the practice exams are set up for me to explain things to you and for you to explain things to me. That way I'm hearing what you're saying. For instance, somebody asked a question last class that gave me an insight about explaining what the meaning of events are. And I literally had to sit with Chris for an hour and try to figure out what's going on and how to solve it. And I decided, you know, the meaning of events is name calling. They're a jerk, right? You saw them do an action, that was the event, and then you deduce and you're calling them a jerk. Now, maybe not everybody thinks they're a jerk, right? But it's name calling. It's calling something a genocide. And like what I would say, you know, we're getting in an argument right now in international politics, I'm sure some of you are aware, about whether what's going on in Gaza is a genocide, right? And here's what I would say to that. It's a little bit, I don't want to get myself in trouble here, but there's not one single person who would look and see what's happened on October 6th, as well as the fallout, that would deny that it's human suffering that's been happening, right? Not one person is going to say, oh, there's no suffering over there, right? We might disagree about what to do about it, what's right, what's just, all that stuff. We fight about it. There, you know, lots of fights about it. And we get in arguments about whether something's a genocide. But whether something's a genocide is not necessarily the question. The question is, what's the suffering? Can we measure it? Can we look at it? Can we prevent it, right? Like every scientist could get on board with here's how we measure suffering and here's how, you know, but then we get into name calling, you know, and we can name call. I'm not asking you not to name call. I'm just asking you to be aware that what you're doing is name calling and being aware that maybe a better way to move forward is to agree about the suffering and say, what can we do to reduce it, right? It's an easier question normatively to ask. So meaning of events is name calling. It's calling something racist. It's calling somebody a jerk. It's, you know, right? Just, it's applying a name to an action, an event, an era, the era of apparently an exact year of 1689 to 1812 was the period of enlightenment. That's a name calling. It's not bad, but it, you know, that's what it is. So in other words, her question gave me an insight about how to use that to help you get 100% on the exam, okay? So in any case, when he started using this software, and it was very few women in his course were passing. It was just a very low number. After he initiated his software, 93% of women were passing the class, 90% of men, you know? So like it actually worked. And so I'm working on a project to understand how that works in the context of the social sciences. Like in physics here at CU, you get your raise based on whether your students are learning. And I got to tell you, I presented some of this work and some of my ideas, and I had a colleague from a different university come up and ask me a question that still gives me a stomach ache. She said, I don't want to be accountable for whether my students are learning. You know? And I'm just like, rawr, you know, like, it kind of put a fire in my belly. And I'm like, you know, they're paying $50,000 a year. And we've got evidence that asking them to memorize stuff is making them dumber, right? So I want to try to solve that problem. I want to give people access. Now, if I had my way, we just had 75 people get themselves into incredible debt to get a PhD, working for less than minimum wage while they're graduate students, so be kind to your TAs. In order to teach here at CU, making half of what I make, and I don't even make the average police officer salary, right? And they're going to make half of that, teaching 3 times as much. You know why? Because they care. If I have my way, I'd hire all of them, 90% of them, and then they would come here and work with you one-on-one, like I did most of my career. But you can't do that in a class of 400. And when I'm talking to other teachers out there, they've got 400 students and no TAs. What are they going to do? So I'm trying to come up with a method that teaches the whole world better, not just my classes. So I created my teaching technique is called TILES, teaching people to identify logical errors systematically. There's my list. You can look at the PowerPoint slide if you'd like to. So now I'm asking for your permission to include you in this study. Now, I will never know if you say yes or no. We're going to send you a document where you get a chance to sign and say, I don't want to do it. I can never know the identity of people who are participating in the study. No one at CU can. The student, the TAs can't. Nobody, the chair of the department can't. Nobody can get access to that. Christopher Lee has access to that, and he's a professor at a different university, right? And he's going to assign students a unique identifier. And after the semester is over, I'm going to analyze data so that I can share what worked, what didn't work, what was effective, what wasn't effective, what is it that students misunderstand, how can we initiate a two-way conversation more efficiently that would help instructors, teaching at big universities and big courses where they don't have the option of write an essay, rewrite an essay, working with people one-on-one. All right, so practically what does this mean? If you participate or not participate, you're doing the same work. You're not going to know, you're not going to, be aware. It's just my ability to start sharing some of these techniques. I mean, I proposed a course like this to a STEM researcher who had a lot of power. And I said, I think students really have a hard time understanding the difference between a fact and an inference, a fact and an argument. And she said, well, prove it. And I said, well, I can't prove it. And she said, well, then get out of my office. And I'm like, I don't know if y'all saw what just happened there. But it's either proof or it does not exist. There's no gray area. She's making the logical fallacy that I'm saying people make, right? And so in any case, and also y'all don't punch down if you ever get power. All right, so you'll receive a DocuSign in your email. You sign it, and you might be reminded if you don't sign it, but if you decline, you won't be reminded again. And you can decline, and I will never know. And some students will decline, and I hope you do if that's what you want to do. So I just want to make that clear. All right, so let's, I just wanted to kind of announce that that's what I've got going on here, just so you can decide for yourself. And you can ask me for my papers, you can, anything you'd like to know. All right, so let's talk about the reading. The fear of being wrong causes people to be not open to dumb ideas. How many people really enjoy being called dumb? And even more, what if I called you dumb, right? It's anything but that. All right, prove it, we get. And then you accept dumb ideas and you reject good ones because people are addicted to certainty. And then that causes the fear of being wrong, and then people die. And that is the subject matter of today's lecture. Science loses also. The human tendency to believe that science is about right and wrong, true and false, fact, is really bad for scientific progress. So there's a myth of the King of Denmark in World War II. Y'all probably have heard this myth that the Nazis took over and then made every Jew wear a yellow star, and then the King of Denmark came out the next day and wore a yellow star, and then everybody wore a yellow star. That's actually not true, as it turns out. But if somebody argued to you that the King of Denmark caused World War II, I think we could look at the evidence and say that that is not true, right? It is false, and it's verifiably false. But I have a cockamamie idea that I have no proof for, and therefore I don't believe it. Like, I can have an idea and not, cradle it like a baby cradles her doll and says, this is my idea, don't anybody talk bad about it, right? So I have this cockamamie scheme that is the Spanish flu contributed to World War II. And you're like, Professor Baird, you've got your dates wrong. The Spanish flu was World War I, right? And I have my reasons. So the Spanish flu could cause maternal fevers. Maternal fevers cause increased generational paranoia because as you have a fever when you're pregnant at a certain stage, it increases the likelihood of schizophrenia and other kinds of psychiatric conditions, which then led to World War II. Now, which then led to 100 million deaths. Am I right about that? Absolutely not, right? It's a crazy idea, but I would rather people put themselves out there and have science be accepting of that people can extrapolate from one area of some evidence and think outside the box about what is going on. And there's a new resurgence of trying to understand World War I right now, which is kind of fun. All right, so Fisher and statistics. So if you've taken a statistics class, you know that Fisher has many coefficients named after him. Famous statisticians like to have their coefficients named after them. There's Cohen's D, there's Pearson R, anti-Semitic jerk. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the merchants of doubt. You read an excerpt of that for today. We've got Frederick Seitz, a physicist who helped build the atomic bomb, Fred Singer, a rocket scientist, and Martin Klein created the first genetically modified mouse. Okay, that was their scientific expertise. In other words, two of them were physicists, and another one was, creating genetically modified, it was a specialist in genes, okay? They were the experts about tobacco and whether it causes cancer. And the entire 20th century, Fisher and these other jerks, testified before Congress for decades saying, we have no proof. We got no proof. Okay, there's a statistical correlation, but correlation is not causation. And so you can't, extrapolate beyond that. You can't use it as evidence. You just say, until there's a fact, it's false. And Klein received $300,000 every year for 10 years, $3 million, for the benefit of testifying before Congress on an area in which he had no expertise. But we're like, well, he's a famous scientist, right? All right, so, and tobacco industry paid way more for research than the American Cancer Society and organizations like that. Doubt is lucrative. And they even called it, this is our product. We are going to create doubt in the minds of people by showing them that you cannot infer at all any possibility of causation from correlation. All right, so he was asked in Congress, does cigarette smoking cause lung cancer? Well, technically speaking, it's quite correlated, he says. But what about the likelihood that it caused cancer in this individual? There's no evidence. All right, so the riddle. What logical mistake would Klein make in exam 1? And by the way, ChatGPT does not know the answer to my riddles. I got, ChatGPT was in a mood for saying some stuff about the rule of law, apparently, from the other day. And so there was a lot of common phrases that I was seeing that had nothing to do with the answer. So in any case, just informing you that I see you, ChatGPT users. All right. And the doubt existed to climate change, the ozone, and acid rain. I mean, acid rain and the ozone happened at a time when Congress actually hired policy specialists who could figure out a solution to the problems. They got together and they solved the problems. Crazy. All right, so corrupt scientists profited because we failed to educate people sufficiently on these logical fallacies. I mean, in Florida, when Rick Scott was governor, he said that he would fire anybody in his administration, like the scientists working for Florida, whatever, environmental, whatever, if they use the word climate change because it's not a fact. Told them he would fire them. All right. What occupation does this person have? Y'all know from the readings? What does she look like? What's that? She looks like a scientist, right? That's the best answer I've gotten all day. Exactly. That's where we're going. So there's one access that there's corruption that capitalizes on the fact that we've insufficiently educated undergraduate students on the nature of science. And here's another type of cause that contributes to the logical fallacy that exists. So we got Sarah Stewart. Bottom line of her story, there's reasons that people did not take her theory seriously as a lens to uncover the unscientific, and I would call it anti-scientific, elements of science. So she's got trials and tribulations. I guess my thing's out of order. Studied home economics at university. Why do you suppose she studied home ec? It was the only thing women were allowed to study. That's not entirely true, but, and she started teaching home economics. It's like, what are you going to do when you've got every door closed to you, right? She was born in Jalisco, Mexico. She went to high school in my hometown of Las Cruces, New Mexico. So I'm so proud. And they would not let her study anything else. But let's talk about the nature of extrapolation. Political scientists right now have lost their mind. No offense to them. People in my department are like, when are they going to get their mind back? And I'm like, I don't know when they're going to get their mind back. But right now, we're not in a mood to extrapolate. So you should see my lecture later on. I'm doing some extrapolation. It's so fun. I love extrapolating. We saw my Spanish flu cockamamie theory. So in 1933, they discovered the fact that papillomavirus caused cancer in rabbits. They determined that that was the cause. Then they found that breast cancer could be transmitted from mother to baby in the mother's milk, okay? That it's transmissible. So here's some ugliness. Sarah Stewart read about that and said, I wonder if viruses might contribute to cancer in humans. Does anybody know what the evidence is there? The herpes virus that everyone has, like the cold sore that you get on your lip when you're 5 years old, causes brain cancer. Ted Kennedy died of a herpes virus brain cancer. HPV. And you all grew up at a time where you had access to a vaccine, right? All right, I did not grow up that way, so a friend of mine just recently died of a completely preventable cancer. Okay, and she died because Sarah Stewart is a woman. All right, I don't want to be rude about that. All right, so she couldn't get funding for her research. As soon as she had her cockamamie idea that I wonder if viruses might contribute to cancer in humans, she was fired, denied funding, thrown out of research centers. She wanted to work for a medical degree, but she couldn't find anyone that would accept her because she was a woman, again. And I keep looking at you because I feel like you're like feeding my energy here, yeah. So she got a job teaching at a medical school and yet was not allowed to enter to try to get a degree at the school she was hired to teach in. She had a PhD, right? So they've hired her. So she did what all faculty have the opportunity to do, which is just take some classes. Then suddenly, all right, so we'll go with the rest of the story in a minute. But why not take Sarah Stewart's ideas seriously? All right, so there are some reasonable reasons to doubt in 1940s that viruses cause cancer. Why? Cancer cannot be spread person to person. You're getting an A+ today. You should send me an email. I'm going to give you some points. You're doing great. All right. It's not contagious. You can hang out with your grandmother who has breast cancer and you're not going to catch it, right? So there are some reasonable reasons to doubt this. Okay. Fair hypotheses. Cancer is not, you could have written my slide. All right. So she extrapolated from studies about rabbits, right? And they said too far to extrapolate from humans to rabbits. I have a story. I'm so pissed off about this. I could get, angry talking about it. But my daughter has had an eating disorder. She was born with it. And we were trying to get her to gain weight. I was like, well, I read this study that says that sugar right before exercise helps kids who have eating disorders gain weight. And my daughter would be chastised in the hospital for doing a little jig, And I would be like, couldn't it possibly be that doing a little jig when you're 7 years old, a reasonable thing to do or whatever? And she said, your daughter is 7, and that study was done on 10 to 15-year-olds. And we only practice evidence-based medicine at this place. And I'm just like, I have to solve this problem, right? Like, I'm just like, and they turned me into CPS for letting her dance. Anyway, from the data about tumor-causing viruses in animals. Some less generous hypotheses to the people in the 1940s was that it might have been her national origin. She's Mexican-American. It might be her skin color. She doesn't look like a scientist, right? And her gender. Likely her gender, but I don't know. We don't know, right? That's another thing we can't prove. But likely, okay. So she was hired to be an instructor. She became the first woman at Georgetown to earn a medical degree. So now she's got a medical degree. She's got some, credentials, and she's still denied funding, fired. As soon as they found out she had a stupid idea, they fired her. And then suddenly it was worth investigating. What happened? Do y'all remember from the reading? There was a man who thought, maybe this is a good idea. And suddenly it's like, oh, okay, maybe we can believe that. All right, so why? Male researcher agreed. By 1960, the National Cancer Institute was spending $4 million a year investigating viruses and cancers. Today, NIH boasts a $70 million budget, and she did not live to see the Gardasil vaccine. I cried this morning writing this lecture. It's sad. But she did live long enough to see her research inspire a generation of researchers who were working on this problem. So that's good. She's a hero. All right, logical fallacies. Extrapolation is not allowed. You're not allowed to get, your ideas, find a correlation, and then diagnose it, figure out what's going on underneath it. And then in a sense, it's sort of a normative fallacy, right? Women shouldn't be scientists. That's why it was illegal for a woman to get a law degree or a medical degree until quite recent. I mean, it's not recent in my lifetime, but it's too recent for my appreciation. All right, I'm gonna give you this. I don't have time to go through it, but y'all can look at this. All right, so why might certainty be our ruin? Okay, so in the one sense, there's too much uncertainty, therefore it's not true. Now we've got a problem where we believed a fact, did not question where that fact came from. Every medical scientist in the 20th century believed this fact, and it was sitting atop an extrapolation. But somebody said it was true. It was written into every medical book that it was true, and it caused untold deaths from COVID. All right, so let's talk about this. First, in the 1940s, there were two doctors. They didn't really like each other. From what I can tell, they're both sweetie pies, but whatever, I don't know. A doctor named Wells believed diseases could be airborne. But diseases being airborne was what's the word for, it's like believing in leeches help, right? Like at the time. And that's because in the 1900s, there was this theory called miasma. Bad air can cause diseases, right? And then that was thrown out the window when Snow discovered that, what's the disease that's really ugly? Cholera. That cholera was caused by a bacteria. So suddenly we learned it. Nobody believes in miasma anymore. And now we've got diseases cannot be airborne. So Wells did a few studies with measles and some other diseases. I have a little digression here. In a sense, and political scientists are like this too, there's every scientist, in a sense, causal theories become kind of normative. And I don't want to confuse you too far down the road, but when I think your idea is stupid because it's inconsistent with my idea, and I don't give it a fair chance, it's kind of like I'm just loving my idea, and protecting it at all costs and throwing out people from grad school because they don't believe my theory or whatever. I mean, that doesn't really happen, but I'm sure it happens, but I've never seen it happen in our school. We're really good here. But it's a logical fallacy to like one theory more than another. It's a logical fallacy to combine your social identity with your theory, right? I can have a cockamamie idea about the Spanish flu in World War II without defending it at all costs, right? And so can you. All right. Yeah, this is somebody protecting their idea and saying, get out of here. All right. So people don't like to feel dumb. That causes groupthink. And then we all get together and we're all, how dumb that is. So in any case, Wells conducted quite a number of hypothesis tests. And by the way, his wife also had a PhD. Mildred Wells was an author on a lot of his research. And Langmuir, who was maybe the greatest epidemiologist of the 20th century, didn't really buy it. He's like, I found a hole. You kind of mess this tiny thing up in your experiments. I don't know. I don't think I believe that. So finally, Wells had an opportunity, airtight opportunity. By happenstance, by accident, he got the opportunity to test his theory in the context of whether tuberculosis could be airborne. It could have been any of the other diseases he had studied, but it was just a chance to be able to study this. And he hooked up tuberculosis units and fed the tuberculosis air into this otherwise airtight room full of, I think, guinea pigs, and they got tuberculosis. Eureka! Diseases can be airborne. But in the case of tuberculosis, it's by happenstance a disease particle that is about 5 microns. It's the size of 5 microns because it cannot infect your throat or your bronchial tubes. It has to infect your alveoli, so it has to be small enough to get in there, okay? So they conceded, Langmuir conceded to the one possibility that diseases could be airborne, but they have to be smaller than 5 microns. Written into every textbook is fact. Every scientist believed it, right? WHO still has their tweet up there that COVID cannot be airborne. It's too big. You know why it's too big? I'll tell you why. Gravity. Gravity was in vogue. I guess it's still in vogue. And so, yeah, gravity. It's hilarious. So Jose Jimenez, who's a CU Boulder professor, and a number of female scientists who were trying to talk to the WHO and say, dude, like, we study particles that are airborne that are 200 microns, right? Like, we know that. Why don't y'all know that? So a couple of scientific historians went down a rabbit hole and figured this out. And I'm not saying that because it was women and people of color who were trying to talk to the WHO that caused them to not be believed, but it's possible. All right, so they accepted it as fact. Everybody believed it as fact. And you want to hear the saddest story? It's in the reading. Langmuir, at the end of his life, wrote an article that was cited like 80 times. You know, he was the director of the CDC for 30 years and has a lot of publications, but nobody read this one. And he said, you know what? I have been smug in my refusal to accept the possibility that larger disease particles could be airborne. And he was apologizing at the end of his life, but people didn't read that one. All right. Okay, so HIV, which causes AIDS. We got a story about that in the reading. Scientists had to stop studying a drug, AZT. You know why? Because it was successful, you know? It's like once you get into a medical study and your study starts to turn out to cure people of this cancer or to reduce their symptoms or whatever you're trying to do, it's your ethical duty to stop the experiment. Save everybody's lives, right? You can't just say, well, to heck with the other 50%. All right, left side of the room. Well, y'all are my left. I'm going to give y'all the answers to the readings because you know what? I like y'all, and I'm not going to give it to y'all, right? You know, you can't do that. And because medical scientists in the 1940s deliberately did that to mostly black men, but black people and people of color in other countries. They deliberately just infected people with diseases and didn't cure them on purpose. Now we have to go through IRB and we have to get your permission to do a study, you know, kind of thing. All right, so it started working. So they're like, okay, we can't study this anymore. We just have to give it out. But then the problem is they did not extrapolate what would happen if we could have continued the study. So they found the drug that worked, but it stopped working. And everybody died of AIDS in the 90s. Not everybody, but some people can get HIV and never get AIDS. There's a genetic component. It's like 10% of Scandinavia cannot get AIDS from HIV. It's kind of an interesting little factoid there. So they concluded, people must be tolerant. They just assumed it as a fact. And then it turns out 10 years later, a doctor accidentally infected himself with a disease, and he's like, well, I'm just going to give myself a lot of AZT and see what happens, you know, and then suddenly, whoo, you know, like, okay. So, but once it's combined with another drug, done. People aren't dying of AIDS. Y'all aren't like terrified of sleeping with a stranger. Probably. I do not judge. But you're not like worried, oh, I'm going to get AIDS, right? Because even if you do, you're going to live your whole life, right? And now there's PrEP, and there's all these ways of preventing it. But then someone discovered that, oh, well, these drug companies are making a lot of money. They don't want to reduce the price, right? And so remember in the Hans Rosling video when he showed everybody getting healthier or whatever, and then all of a sudden in Africa, people are dying of AIDS? And in the early aughts, everybody's talking about the ethics of that. Are you really going to not give them the medication? So somebody says something, and pissed the scientists off. They're like, that's not true. You know what causes people to die of AIDS? Poverty, right? And so this is called conditional causality. Here I have rich people. You have AZT, people are less likely to die. Now, some people don't take their, and then they die, There's this like weird common thing that you tell people they have HIV or you tell people they have cancer, like a big majority even deny. They're like, that's not possible. In any case, whatever. So some people, they live in a rich country, but they don't think they have AIDS or something like that. Anyway, but in poor countries, because you don't have access to AZT, the availability of AZT is not saving their lives. So in a way, this is like conditional causality. This causes this in one condition, not in another. All right, so, okay, that was, do we still have time? Where are we in the day? Oh, we got 7 minutes to practice. I'm so excited. Okay, this is a fun one, okay? This is a hard one. Female literacy rates was something he talked about in the Hans Rosling video, right? Has an impact on the average number of children born to each woman. How do you suppose you measure female literacy rates? Like what kind of unit are you looking at when you're measuring female literacy rates? Does anybody in here have a female literacy rate they want to share? Right, it doesn't apply to individuals, which is why. But how would you measure that if you're talking about a country, you're talking about I'm talking about literacy rates, not born rates, so I think I've messed this up. Female, I screwed this one up. All right, so it's my fault. I was thinking about the average number of people born to each woman. I really screwed this up, so I'm sorry about that. What I was trying to do was I was trying to say one thing causes a restatement of the same thing. Y equals Y. Smoking equals smoking. Smoking causes smoking. It is smoking, right? And what is that? It's like a tautology, right? It cannot be wrong. So that was what I was going for. I'm going to have to fix the slide. All right, George W. Bush caused the economic crash in 2008. And by the way, if I said that to you, I'm like, all right, I'm going to tell you what the truth is. George Bush caused that anyway. What do you think? What conversation are we having? We're really having a conversation about who's to blame. We're having a normative conversation. But if you're intellectually honest, the words are saying something else. So what kind of statement is this? Is it general predictive causality? George Bush's often cause all of the 2008 economic crises. It's not that one, right? But it does have the word cause in there. So what is it? Every single time somebody has uttered this statement, they're being normative, right? They're telling you who's to blame. Whereas I have a magnet on my refrigerator that says, I didn't say it was your fault. I said I was going to blame you, which is kind of a fun logical fallacy there. Probably people mean to be normative, and then they're going to get into, well, he's kind of dumb about economics, or you get into like stupid evidence. But really, if you're trying to like look at the evidence, you trace through what happened. Was there a policy that was made? Was there a decision that was made? Was there, right? You trace the process to see what actually did the causing, right? And it could be multiple things. I mean, that's the trouble with historic event causality, is you cannot test the hypothesis. It's not scientific, which does not mean not valuable. It just means it's not a scientific question because you've only got one unit, right? You know, it doesn't mean you can't try to investigate it. There's evidence that's valid to try to look at this. But if you're being normative about it, which virtually 100% of the people, when they say something like this, they're being normative about it, and then they're going to give you improper evidence for this statement. And that's what I want you to clue into. Okay. The distrust the founders had of the masses caused the Electoral College. How many people learned that in high school? You know, one time I was in my office for 3 hours with this student, and I could not disentangle the cancer of this belief out of his mind to consider maybe there's something else that caused that outcome. And we're going to be talking about that later in the semester. But technically, what kind of statement is this? If you go through your flow chart, is somebody making a causal argument when they say this? Are they saying that there's an explanation, that there's something that happened that caused the outcome? Yes. Now, I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with this claim. You just need to give me evidence for it, you know? And let me just tell you one logical fallacy that everybody commits. And I commit it, you'll commit it tomorrow, probably later today, is that reasons are not causes. No one in this class walks around saying, the reason I vote is because I have high levels of optimism. Right? You got your reasons, and you think that your reasons caused you to do that. People are not aware of their causes. That's another cancer I'd like to remove from people's brains. They said this is a reason, right? I mean, what's kind of interesting about the Federalist Papers, if y'all have ever read some, we're reading one next week, it's kind of fun. None of them said something in the Constitution was not a good idea. And you look at the discussions that they had during this convention, and they fought bitter fights over these questions. Bitter fights. But after it, they're like, look at what a great idea this was, right? And everyone's like, well, that must have been the cause. All right, so we'll continue this on Tuesday, and I'm happy to take questions or